So this video in the mod series on this MXZ 670 is going to be the 501 rotary valve, Shorty intake boots, and oil injection delete.
First thing we're going to need to do is get the old gas out that's not pre-mixed, so I'm going to go ahead and just drain that now. I'm going to drain that into an empty jerry can here. So I got that going in there. This other jerry can here is full of new gas that we're going to pre-mix. Okay, so I've got my oil measured out for the amount of gas that I have. Just poured some gasoline into the oil container here. Gonna just shake that around, get that gas all nice and mixed up with the oil that's in there. Then what we'll do is pour it into the remaining gas that's in this jerry can here. So once we get that poured in there, we'll have a nice mixture. This is the way I like to do it. I've found this is always the way it works best. Then I'll also give this jerry can a nice shake before I go any further, before I put it into the snowmobile. So that's all shaken up. Gonna now fill the tank in the snowmobile with this. Pre-mixed gas is going in, so we're gonna fill up the snowmobile, then we're gonna take it outside and start it up. So I got the snowmobile running now, and I'm just gonna let that run. Wanna get that pre-mixed gas through the carbs, just so when we do the first startup, once all the mods are done, it'll have lubrication. Back inside, and what we're gonna do now is just take some stuff off. First thing we gotta get off and out of the way is our air box, which is this here, that's just held on by a black elasticy tab there. Then we'll take the carbs off. So got the air box out, gonna just undo the boots that hold the carbs on, and like I mentioned, these are gonna be replaced. So just gonna unscrew those, put the carbs aside. You got to remember too, there is some fuel in the bowls of these carbs, so ideally if you can get them to stand straight up just so they're not leaking anywhere, that's best. So now that I've got those guys off and just out of the way, I just got two more screws, one there, and we'll get the boots off. Now that our boots are off, I've got this line here. That I believe is a pulse line. And then we've got our oil pump here, so we're going to take that oil pump cable off, and I got to cut that line off there as well. And then the line going underneath the oil pump as well is going to have to come off. So now we've got this line here that is fed from the bottom of the oil tank. I'm just going to pull it off, put it into that bottle, and then cap it off. And the reason we're going to put it in the bottle is your oil tank's going to drain. Okay, now this little guy here, we've got to get him off of that oil pump. And then we're going to be able to start to remove that oil pump. You got to remove that screw there, and then there's one underneath, but you won't be able to get the pump off because it's held in place by a nut from the back side, so we'll have to do that afterwards. We're going to also have to remove this ground wire, and then we're going to have to remove those 4 bolts and pull off the whole rotary valve cover, which is the next thing we're going to be doing. Alright, so we got the rotary valve cover off. That's your rotary valve, that disc on the shaft there. There's this O-ring, we got to pull that off, and we're going to replace that. That's going to be a hard one to get back on if you don't replace it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the magneto side spark plug. We have to get that piston to top dead center in order to time the rotary valve correctly. So that's the reason we're doing that now. Back on the bench here, we've got that rotary valve cover off. Loosen those 2 screws there. So I've gone around and removed those bolts. I believe there were 6 of them. All those. That'll allow us to pull off our oil pump. There is a pin on right there that's kind of holding it in place. So you just want to pop that out. There's a gasket in here, and there's the nut that's holding the oil pump gear on. So we'll just have to loosen that, and then we can pull our oil pump off. There's a couple of the parts you're going to need. You got the cover plate, and then the gasket, and then just some small oil lines. That small oil line is designed to go from that nipple to that nipple. You can also just cap them off, which is what I actually ended up doing in the end. It's a much better way to do it. So we're going to go ahead, line up our gasket, and then we can take our cover plate and go ahead and screw that all into place, because that portion of the oil delete is now done. Now you can go ahead and put those bolts back into place. And back over here onto the motor. If you look just at the top of the rotary valve, there's a scribe mark. I don't know if that came from the factory, but that's where this rotary valve is timed, and I actually didn't notice that completely But when my screwdriver goes here to top dead center, you'll see that that scribe mark is now gone. You're going to rotate the motor with the clutch just to move that valve where your screwdriver is at its highest point. That's top dead center. You definitely should use a gauge, but this is the way you improvise when you don't have a gauge, and do it this way. This is a 97 racing manual. That's the part number ending in 500. This is the 501, the new valve, which is about 5 degrees difference. You can see the two there. The bottom one is the one I took off, and then the 501 is a valve cut to the 501 spec. And you can do that just by lining them up, so you can just verify, yep, that is the correct one there. And you can see here it doesn't line up because it's hiding that a little bit. But we take that valve, line it up, and now it's cut to the 501 spec. And if you come to the page previous, you'll see we have a 169 and a 164. So we've got 5 degrees of difference between the two. If you look on I believe it's the 97 MXZ 670, we're timed at 145 and 71. And then the 501 valve is 145.76. So there's your 5 degrees difference. And that seems to be what I've been reading online, what most people do as far as timing this 501 valve on the 670 motor. So 145.76 rather than the 145.71. Before we put this back on, I'm just going to flip it over here and then install that O-ring. And then I'm also going to give a nice coat of oil to the face of this as well, just so the valve is lubricated when the engine starts. So I've got this degree wheel here. I've just printed this off online. Definitely get yourself, spend the 15 bucks or whatever it is to get a clear one. It makes this job a lot easier. You've got to line up that 0 line on the bottom of the intake port on the magneto side piston, so you can just rotate the clutch till you get it there. I kind of just use my fingernail to make sure I was right at the bottom because I can't see through this. And then what we're going to do is go back our timing, back to I think it was 145, and then make a mark. I've already marked out this paper gauge here, so I know where that is, and that in this case should line up perfectly with that scribe mark. Then what we'll do is we'll rotate to the top of the intake port, the 0 line, and then we'll go back to the 76, I believe is what we said. I'll double check that manual before I do it, but that's where it is. So you want to make those 2 marks and then put your rotary valve on and make sure it lines up within those 2 marks. So there's that scribe line that I want to line up with. So I got my valve there. You can see when I'm just rotating that slightly, we're lined up perfectly there on those 2 marks. Now if you didn't line up perfectly the first time, what you can do with these valves is actually just flip it over, and they're asymmetrical, so the 2 lines will not line up perfectly on each side. So just keep that in mind if it's not lining up for you right away. So I got my cover back on. We're going to remove this line here, which is our oil vent line, and then we also have this line here, which I believe was a feed line that's going to go to this new little reservoir bottle. You can see there's an in and an out and a vent on it, so we just have to hook those up correctly, and then we'll just kind of zip tie that into place. So what I'm going to do is actually swap around these 2 cables. The top one is, I believe, a little shorter or a little longer, and the bottom one's a little shorter. So it actually works out if you swap those 2 when you're hooking them up to this this little jug here. So I'm going to go ahead, just pull those off and do that, and then I'll just be able to put that jug somewhere. For now, I'm just going to kind of have to zip tie it into place until I build a bracket for it, but that'll kind of get us going for today. So I've kind of just mocked that up. I've just mocked that up into place where I kind of think I want it to be. Going to come back down here and just put that grounding wire onto that bolt again, and then this portion of it is done. Now the next portion of this mod is actually the intake boots, and that's one reason why we had to do this oil delete. It's because the boots get the carbs a lot closer. You can see they came with these little hose clamps. I don't really like those. I'm going to stick with the factory ones, so I'm just going to take those off and swap them out. So here's just a bit of a comparison to the 2 boots. You also want to note that the angles line up nicely on them, so that's going to help keep your carb float height proper. Just because the angle it's sitting at, you won't have to do any adjustments there. You can kind of see here just the difference between the 2 boots, how we're going to get so much closer to the carbs now, so that low end signal should be a lot better. So I filled this guy up with oil now to the level line when it is level. I know it's not sitting level right now. But just gonna keep an eye on that, and if it does go down, you're gonna have to top it up from time to time. So got that one boot on, put the other one on, and get the carbs back on. Carbs are now back on, nice and close to the motor. Looks a lot better, a lot cleaner. So just gonna go ahead, tighten those up. Set your idle to 15 to 1700, and then what we'll do is put that air box back on and get this thing ready to go. Also recommend putting new spark plugs in, gapped properly when you do this as well. That way, when you're, especially before you're setting the idle, it definitely makes a difference.
So there we go, everything is back into place. One thing with this little black elastic band, because we're so much closer now, our air box is so much closer because of those Shorty intake boots, I can't really clip on here, so I just clipped it on like this for now. They do actually sell one that has a bunch more of these lines in it, so I think you can set it further back in the airbox. So I'm gonna try and source one of those, and I'll show you that in another video if I do end up doing that. So basically now we're just gonna have to tune this thing, just some basic adjustments to the carbs just to see how it's running. Hopefully you guys have checked out the other videos in this series on the MXZ 670 mods that I've been doing. Hopefully it helps you guys get your machines running a little bit faster and getting the most potential out of them. So please make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and if you have any questions on this, just please leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer.